And now we have Kevin McCorry from the People's Movement in Ireland, and he's going to speak about the EU and the Eurozone.
Yeah, well, actually, what I'm going to speak about is really what was the theme of today's summit, which was the growing antipathy to the EU within Europe, and I'm going to address that in the context of Ireland. Because there have been a number of quite significant political developments in Ireland which are relevant to what we're talking about today. First of all, to put it in context, Ireland has gone through a period of massive austerity over the last number of years. And Ireland's political class have tried to win the kudos of the EU, their EU counterparts, by missing no opportunity to assure them that the Irish people will be prepared to make any sacrifice, come what may, for the EU. That was their mantra, and that was something that they pushed continuously. The Irish finance minister at the time of the crash was a man called Brian Lenihan, and he was on record as saying, he bragged about Ireland's capacity to take pain. In France, he said, you would have had riots if you have tried to do what the Irish government was doing in terms of austerity. And the present Minister of Finance, Michael Noonan, a man who makes his German equivalent like the Good Fairy, in the sense that he's perhaps one of the most obnoxious individuals in the Irish political scene. He keeps repeating, we are not Greece, as a sort of a chauvinist boast about that the Irish are in some way better than the Greek people. So that was the context. But over the last year, in fact, from probably just about this time last year, there has begun to emerge the makings of an alternative politics within the Republic, which I think people should be aware of, and particularly an audience like this. And it is a very, very significant alternative which involves a degree of mass mobilisation which is on a par with countries that most people would be more aware of, like Spain and Portugal and so on. And these mass mobilisations involve electoral tactics, and I'll explain what was involved there, but is more significantly involves local groups, and I mean really small local community groups, developing democratic organisations of resistance to austerity, and specifically in relation to an issue which is very important, and that is the issue of water charges, which I'll explain to you a bit more. But as I say, Ireland was pushed as a model to the rest of the Eurozone as a country that can take the pain and has now come out of the bad period, the dark period, and is now once again in the forefront of a country that is developing. But the figures, as so many of these figures, they need to be taken with a grain of salt. For example, take the figure of GDP and GNP that are cited, because they require careful scrutiny. Most of you know that Ireland is the location for a lot of US corporates, and the corporates use Ireland as a tax haven, moving vast sums of money in and out of the country. For example, in 2012, the service-related exports from such companies amounted to 91 billion, but almost 40 billion of that was accounted for by transfer pricing. So in fact, it wasn't really real growth for the economy. And unemployment, which was at 15%, the boast now is it's now down under 10%, just under 10%. But that ignores the fact of mass immigration, which has kept unemployment down significantly, because without that mass immigration, the unemployment rate would be on a par with Greece and Portugal. Almost 475,000 young people left the country between 2008 and 2014. The total labour force in 2014 was little over 2 million. From 2018 onwards, the Irish state was saddled with the most expensive bank bailout in European history. The infamous, now defunct Anglo-Irish Bank, which was like an ATM machine for builders and speculators. They just went in, got the money, and the massive bubble was created, the massive bubble. When it went belly up, it left us with losses of 35 billion. Its comrade in arms, in banking terms, the Allied Irish Bank, wasn't far behind with a 28 billion hole in its finances. And of course, the poor Irish population, they were landed with these liabilities, and they were passed on, as I say, to Irish citizens. ECB figures, their own sort of official figures, show that in April 2015, Ireland's share of the European banking crisis was grossly disproportionate, given the size of the country, to that in other parts of the Eurozone. The coverage cost, the average cost of bank bailouts across the Eurozone was 5% of GDP, but in Ireland it was 37%. Most will be recalled was invested or spent on toxic assets and bank recapitalisations. Interest payments on the national debt will rise to 9.2 billion in 2016, next year, the 100th anniversary of the independence struggle, the beginning of the independence struggle, which led to the emergence of an independent state, which asserted the right of the Irish people to the unfettered sovereignty and its control of Irish destinies. So we're landed with 9.2 billion of 1/5 of the tax revenue. We're landed with this burden. From 2008 to 2018 or 2014, austerity budgets took 30 billion out of the economy. 2/3 came from spending cuts. So that was the context, the austerity context in which people were facing into the situation. And then on top of all this, you had the introduction of the water charges. Now, nobody that I know has any objection to paying for water services and for the upkeep of the infrastructure and all the rest of it. But the problem was, and the issue was, the question of that should be financed out of progressive taxation. But what was proposed was as a process towards the privatisation of water, which is inherent in the whole EU project. If it moves, privatise it. It was to charge for water. And in 2010, the government signed a memorandum with the IMF to move towards full cost recovery in the provision of water services, with responsibility for water being transferred from local authorities to a national utility. And hey presto, you had the emergence of Irish Water. Now, Irish Water, we were talking, there's lots of topics we could be spending, John was saying there's a lot of topics we could be spending the whole weekend talking about. Irish Water is one such topic. It's crony capitalism. Dennis O'Brien, I don't know whether any of you have ever heard of Dennis O'Brien. Dennis O'Brien owns 2 radio stations, a lot of major newspapers. But Dennis O'Brien's business career got a leg up, got a start in the 90s when a minister in the then government, coalition government, had a little deal with him. And got, as a consequence of that, he got a license for digital telephone. A committee of inquiry described the action of the minister as an example. The worst case of, I think the expression they used was venal cronyism or some such expression. Now, Dennis O'Brien got the contract for installing the meters for the Irish Water Company. Oh, he's also a supporter of the government party. Surprise, surprise. Not only that, the company that he used to do this, he got it as a job lot from the outfit that was set up by the government to sell off all these toxic assets that came from the crash. So not only did he get his hand on this company, he also got a bit of a backhander as well in relation to that. Now that's what really got up the people's nose. Okay, so as a consequence of that, there were local demonstrations. People began civil disobedience when they came in to install the meters. There were people sat down in front of the people who were coming in to do it. And an organisation emerged called Right to Water, which was trade union based, community based, brought together local organisations, and they called a demonstration in Dublin. And they thought, we'll call a demonstration. We'll maybe get 20,000 on a good day. Okay, we know people are annoyed, but it's that's most we can buy. Over 100,000 emerged, and in the Irish context, that would be about 1 million. If it was in Spain, that would be about 1 million people. A day of civil disobedience later mobilised about 200,000 at various local demonstrations, and you had little groups coming up. In my little area, it's Mulrankin says no, and it's the local, your neighbour. Maybe the local policeman who does it on the QT, that local trade unionist or whatever, local organisations who will be mobilised. Well, if there's a demonstration in Dublin, we'll come out and we'll go on that. Now, I know I'm coming up to the 15 minutes. Right to Water then produced a campaign called The Right to Change. And the right to change is a set of political demands which they have got various political organisations, Sinn Féin, the various left organisations, trade unions and so on, to sign up to. And this is being pushed as a possible programme for a progressive government, alternative to the present setup. Now, that's not me losing the run of myself, you know, saying, oh, this is a guy, he'd probably get hold a meeting and there'd be 6 people in the room. I probably would hold a meeting and there'd be 6 people in the room. However, the opinion polls show, elections show, that somewhere in the region of 40 to 50% of the people would vote for political parties that subscribe to these sort of principles, which are basic principles of decency, democracy, and so on. And without mentioning the EU, inevitably, if it is pushed through, it brings people in a collision course with the EU, and particularly with the fiscal and policies that are so obnoxious and such a burden on people. Thank you.